You know what, I think you're probably gonna see about 15 or 20 deer in both parks probably next year. I don't know, but I mean, what would be nice to do, is if you're going to, have sharpshooting again next year and to justify it to your constituents, is to have a survey conducted in both parks or the areas you're looking at, just to, and it can be done with cameras or whatever, and, you know, we can certainly provide that service also. But do a survey of what you believe is in the park towards the end of summer, beginning of fall, so you have an idea, well, this is the numbers we're dealing with. Do we think we can manage this with bow hunting, or should we do another year of sharpshooting? You know, so that way you can justify whichever direction you go. At least I feel you could better than just saying, well, we're gonna have the sharpshooters come in and you have no justification really why. If you've got some surveys done, then that might help.
Do you have any thoughts about the areas in between where there's more population, like a Wigner Park, a Stable Creek Parkway, you know, those areas that connecting like Laron and Richmond?
Sure. I could not answer that. I didn't look at those areas. We weren't really focusing on them, so I don't know the answer of how many deer. I'm sure that they use those as corridors, travel corridors on occasion, for sure. But you know, we didn't encounter. Like I said, we've only removed 4 adult bucks, and we didn't encounter many. I mean, we shot what we could shoot, really. And so those deer are moving to and from somewhere, and that you know, they could certainly be using those corridors.
Right there, we've done. I think the city did the surveys, just the visual surveys, before we began the archery program, and the numbers in all the parks, the square mile of all the parks, they were comparable, more or less in places, but all the parks have an overabundance of deer, according to the numbers that they observed. But those areas were the harder ones because the harder ones to do any kind of control in because of the residences are closer than at either of these parks. So I'm wondering if you had advice or any kind of thoughts on those.
I would have to look at them physically to see. I mean, we've done removal in close to homes, but obviously with permission and with knowledge of the homeowners, you know. But we've done them in some tight spaces before. Safety is the #1 concern when we're doing this, regardless. So if we didn't feel it's a safe situation, then we would, you know, let you know that this probably isn't the best situation for this location. But I would have to look at them and see what the whole, you know, the layout is, what type of topography we have, and all that before I could comment.
Chip, just so you know, with our surveys that we did, they were basically deer drives.
Oh, okay.
That was the closest we could get.
Yeah.
Do anything like that, we did it under snow cover, things like that. I understand, you know, I'm gonna kind of piggyback on Joanne's question a little bit. You haven't seen all 9,000 acres of West Bend. You don't understand kind of how big the
Right.
But, and I think the sharpshooter program is probably the best tool to manage a deer herd. I mean, you guys did an excellent job. You guys were great to work with, easy to work with. It was a piece of cake. But how are we going to reduce the deer population on 9,000 acres? Because I look at John's neighborhood, and I know you take complaints up there, you know, concerned residents. Understandable. How are we going to reduce the deer herd or population on 9,000 acres? And I know we can't do it overnight, and I know we can't do it in 2 years or 3 years. I mean, are you guys going to be available every year for West Bend if our piggy bank has enough money in it, and every year we hire you and you just keep removing deer?
If you need us to be, we would be. What happens in a lot of other communities is they, you know, have a large problem like you have. You knock the numbers down, and then it's maintenance mode after that. So you're removing half a dozen here, there, you know, wherever it might be necessary. And you know, and I know a lot of communities do that. A lot of different parks. We do this at different airports and different cities throughout this, you know, this part of the state or in other parts of the state. So you hate to have to invest in something where you can't solve the problem, where you're always you know, it's just always in maintenance mode, but, you know, that, it depends on what's acceptable and what you deem acceptable and what the citizens deem acceptable here in the city. You know, maybe you allow bow hunting in some areas, maybe you have other areas that you do sharpshooting. Maybe you let, I know that something was mentioned before we started that, you know, a certain size property, you'll allow bow hunting on that acreage, you know, within the city limits. So those are things to consider and think about. But it really is, it's up to you all to decide what is the number that's acceptable, and, you know, I mean, we'll be available to help, however you need us. I mean, whether it's us doing the sharpshooting, providing recommendations, advice, or doing surveys for you, whatever you need. We would, yeah, we'd be available. But it's a common thing that once you knock the population down to where that you've got them under a certain amount of control, or the numbers to where it's not causing as much damage, you're not getting as many phone calls from people where the property's being damaged and so forth, then you just get into a maintenance mode where you're moving X number of deer from this location and this location and maybe this location. That, okay.
I guess maybe a question for Jay, did we get a final cost at this point in time? For Jay, Chip?
We spent the full amount. In fact, we
9,000?
yeah, we honestly, we would have went over by several thousand. But you guys you will be billed the amount that was agreed to. But we would have, if we would have had an unlimited amount, it would probably cost a couple of thousand more than what was billed, what was agreed to. So, and I have discretionary funds, and that's what I dipped into. So,
is part of that reason because we had 8 events versus you were thinking fewer than that?
Well, I think you know, if we were to do it again also, we would probably start at Ridge Run as opposed to Lac La Reine. What some of the guys were thinking was the area to the north of the city where Lac La Reine is, I believe it gets hunted, is that correct?
Around,
yes. So not pretty close. Those deer did not act like park deer, they acted like hunted deer. I mean, they really did. Right off the bat, they started, we'd shoot one, you know, usually a group of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 deer come in. We can usually get a half or more of those deer. And we would shoot one of those deer and the rest would run. So they had been shot at before, in my opinion. When we went to Ridge Run, I mean, they were park deer. They hung around, we shot multiple deer in groups very easily. So it was noticeable. So if we were to do again, we would focus on Ridge Run first and then move over to Lac La Reine second. Because later in the winter, the deer group up and they become less skittish, and they focus more on the bait that we had out than you know, not. And I think it would be a little more effective. So we would switch things around a little bit. We learned a lot, and a lot of it, when you come into a new location, it's a learning curve. And you know, my estimate, I didn't want to overshoot it and I didn't want to undershoot it, so I kind of fell a little bit in the middle where I thought, at least at the time when I budgeted for this, and you know, my mistake, I under budgeted, but to your benefit this year, so, you know, and we won't back charge those costs at all. That's just something that we eat and take care of. So, but you know, I have a better idea now on, okay, the amount of time and effort that it takes to focus on moving deer here. So we would, you know, do a better job next year, and there might be cost savings, you know, in those efforts. So, because we being billable, we bill for our time and effort, and if it takes less time and effort to reach the goal that you're after, then, you know, we wouldn't bill for, we'd bill for what it was.
Check the recommendation for the survey. Do you have an estimate on what, even if it's a rough ballpark estimate, what that might cost the city if we were to contract with your group to do the survey?
I haven't even thought about that, Jay, and if you guys are already doing the surveys, then I would recommend to continue that, since you've got guys on.
We did some deer drives last winter.
Yeah.
That was it. We haven't done anything since.